Heyo! I am a sucker for platformers. I may be terrible at them, but they are so much fun. A lot of my most cherished gaming memories came from platformers, most notably Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Odyssey. For that reason, platformers are synonymous with Nintendo in my mind. Whenever I think of a platformer, I immediately start thinking of franchises like Mario, Kirby, and Donkey Kong Country. Recently though, a new contender has appeared, ready to join that elite list of franchises, and I personally couldn't be more excited. That contender is Astro Bot. The PlayStation 5 is the first PlayStation I've ever owned. Even during the worst parts of the Xbox One generation, I've always had an Xbox instead of a PlayStation. It was a simple choice for me. Most of my friends had an Xbox, so I would get one too. I never even considered getting a PlayStation at the time because of all of the restrictions on crossplay. If I had a PlayStation, I wouldn't be able to play any multiplayer games with my friends, so what was the point? When crossplay restrictions were finally lifted though, I started to look into the PS4, and I'm not gonna lie, I got jealous. Games like Spider-Man and The Last of Us looked so cool. PlayStation became synonymous with cinematic, story-driven experiences, which I thought was awesome. The Xbox One definitely didn't have nearly as many games to that level, so it was something that really caught my eye. When the next generation rolled around, my mind was made. I wanted to give the PS5 a try. After a long and hard battle with scalpers, I finally managed to get my hands on a PS5 bundled with Horizon Forbidden West. It was awesome to get a game bundled with the console, don't get me wrong, but it was a bit of an issue because I hadn't played the first Horizon game, so I didn't want to jump into the sequel without even knowing the story of the first game or getting to experience it. As a result, I really only had one game left to play, that being Astro's Playroom. I figured it would just be another pack-in game meant to sell me the gimmicks of the console and do absolutely nothing more. But I mean, it's not like I had any other PlayStation exclusives to play, so I mean, hey, why not give it a try? And I'm very thankful I did give it a try because my mind was blown by the sheer quality of Astro's Playroom. It wasn't just a quickly made pack-in game meant to sell a gimmick, it's an amazing platformer that clearly had a ton of passion put into it. My biggest issue when using my PS5 for the first time was getting used to the controller. Who knew that something as simple as moving a joystick a couple inches would make such a drastic difference? My whole life, I had been used to the typical joystick position that you'd find on an Xbox controller or even the Switch's Joy-Cons, so the PS5 controller felt much different to me. Astro's Playroom was my first real experience getting used to the PlayStation controller, and I think because of Astro's Playroom, that transition went much smoother than I would have anticipated. The position of the joystick wasn't the only thing different about the controller that Astro's Playroom introduced me to. The DualSense controller for the PS5 is packed with a ton of cool features. I'd go as far as to say that it rivals the Switch's Joy-Cons for having the most useful features. The touchpad on the controller is amazing and really cool to use, the rumble on the controller is just as good as the Joy-Con's HD rumble in my opinion, and the speakers built into the controller were actually utilized much better than I thought they would be. Astro's Playroom takes advantage of the DualSense controller so well. I can tell what surface I'm walking on without even looking at my TV or listening to the audio coming from my TV. I feel so much more immersed in the world with the adaptive trigger and the speaker in the controller. The world feels so much more alive because of how responsive the controller is. Before getting my PS5, I never would have even considered that features like that would actually make a difference. Such great use of the DualSense controller makes me disappointed that not many games actually take advantage of the controller in the same way. A handful of games I've played use the adaptive trigger, but that's about it. The touchpad is just a button to press rather than do anything with, and the rumble is just as basic as what you'd find in an Xbox controller. I'm not even kidding, every now and then I'll open up Astro's Playroom for a little while just to use the controller's features since not many games actually use them. Team Asobi, the developers of Astro's Playroom, have made a similar game for the PSVR, where it uses Astro to showcase all the things that the PSVR is capable of. That game was received very well, so clearly Team Asobi is a talented team of developers, and they clearly know just how to utilize a console's capabilities. I think the fact that there even was a pack-in game with the PS5 at all is amazing. You don't see that very often anymore. Nintendo hasn't given the Switch or the Wii U any pack-in games, even though with the Switch they probably should have bundled 1-2 Switch, they didn't. The Xbox Series consoles didn't have any pack-in games either, so it was really nice that the PS5 actually had one. They get you excited about what the console is capable of and what's to come. Pack-in games are always such a simple concept, but if they're done right, they can be something truly special. Wii Sports is the best example of a pack-in game done right. The game is short and sweet, and the concepts are simple, but the gameplay is so fun and addictive that it's one of the best games on the console. Wii Sports took such great advantage of the Wii's motion controls that it inspired inspired plenty of people, even non-gamers, to give the Wii a try. Astro's Playroom, while it may not be as generation-defining as a game like Wii Sports, is amazing for the same reasons. It's a simple game that makes such great use of the controller's capabilities, and it makes me really optimistic for what the future holds. The boss battles in Astro's Playroom are amazing, the different gameplay mechanics in the game were fun, and overall the game is just so fresh. It's a short game, but it's always throwing something new and exciting at you. When I finally beat the game, I was so hooked that I ended up playing through it again just to 100% it, and that says a lot, since I'm not usually one to try and 100% a game. The graphics in Astro's Playroom are insanely good. The art style fits the game so well, and the colors pop on screen. Everything is so vibrant and beautiful. It's honestly one of the best looking games of the generation in my opinion. Once again, the quality of the game itself greatly exceeded my expectations for a pack-in game. You can clearly tell that a lot of love went into making this game. Each world is based on a part of the PS5's hardware, like the GPU or the SSD, and those worlds make such clever and unique connections. I thought it would be cheesy when I first noticed that each level was based off of a certain hardware piece, but it actually really grew on me, and I really appreciate it. A lot of platformers stick to the typical forest, desert, winter, and ocean themes, and I'm not gonna lie, it gets pretty boring after a while. That's why I thought it was so awesome to see such different level design in Astro's Playroom. Yeah, Astro's Playroom had levels with those traditional themes as well, but the twist they put on those themes to connect to a piece of hardware made them feel really unique, and overall, the creativity in Astro's Playroom is bursting at the seams. The game is a celebration of PlayStation's history, which I think is amazing. It was the perfect game to be my first PlayStation exclusive game, since there were so many Easter eggs and callbacks to PlayStation's history. It was really cool checking out all the different Easter eggs that were in the game and trying to figure out which franchise it was referencing. Even though I hadn't played any of the games that were being referenced, it still felt like I was being personally welcomed into the PlayStation community. Those references added a charm to the game that I really haven't seen outside of a Nintendo game. That's something I liked the most about this game. It was a breath of fresh air. Although I hadn't played any other PlayStation exclusives yet, I had definitely noticed a pattern. Like I said earlier, PlayStation had become synonymous with story-driven, cinematic experiences. So Astro's Playroom was a total curveball. It was much different. It was still amazing, but the game shines in its gameplay rather than its story. I think that's something that Sony needs a lot more of. Their story-driven games like The Last of Us and God of War are great, don't get me wrong, but putting all your eggs in one basket is never a good idea. They need to branch out to more audiences, and I couldn't think of a better way. Sony's recent attempts to branch out to more audiences by focusing on live services is something that's really concerned me. Live services have the opportunity to be great, sure, but they rarely are. The recent failure of Concord is a shining example of this. Very few live service games end up being quality, profitable releases, and even if the game does release and it's very good, chances are players aren't going to stick with it for very long. There needs to be an insane amount of dedication to a live service game to keep players coming back. So the game could be the best live service game ever made, but chances are it's just not going to stick for very long. Making a good live service game is like trying to find a unicorn, and seeing Sony pour a lot of their resources into chasing that unicorn really worried me. What they really need is a greater variety in their single player releases. What I love about Nintendo is that they have a first party game in pretty much every genre. Want to play a platformer? You should play Mario. Want to play a fighting game? Super Smash Bros. RPG? Xenoblade. I could go on and on. Sony doesn't have as much of a variety though. A game like Astro's Playroom, which is so different from what Sony is most known for, is something that they really need. The announcement of Astro Bot got me extremely excited, not only because it's a sequel to a game that I love, but because I think it signals a shift in Sony's approach, or at the very least, an understanding of what the fans want. At the beginning of the State of Play where Astro Bot was announced, Sony announced the hero shooter Concord. The cinematic gave off a ton of Guardians of the Galaxy vibes, and I think the game would have had a lot of potential if it wasn't a live service. It was a live service though, so the fans were not happy whatsoever, myself included. The vibes of that State of Play pulled a total 180 though when Astro Bot was announced. Astro Bot is a fun, complete single-player game that's something different than the usual massive cinematic games that Sony is known for. The fact that Sony put the trailer at the end of the showcase tells me that Sony knows that games like Astro Bot are what the fans really want. For this entire generation, people have been complaining that the PS5 has no games, and rightfully so. While the PS5 does have some great exclusives like Spider-Man 2 and Ratchet & Clank: A Rift Apart, some of the biggest releases of this generation were also released on the PS4. Horizon Forbidden West, released on PS4. God of War Ragnarok, released on PS4. Sony released remasters of both games in the Last of Us series, but you can get those same games on the PS4 with almost the exact same quality and for much cheaper. There really hasn't been much to be excited about with the PS5 so far. Sony's had a pretty dry release schedule, and what they do actually release has mostly been either cross-gen games or live service games. Astro Bot is that massive shift that I think Sony really needs to turn this generation around. I don't think that a game like Astro Bot would have been possible if it wasn't for Astro's Playroom. Astro's Playroom really knocked it out of the park, and I think that it set down the building blocks for a game like Astro Bot to really exist and thrive. I'm so thankful that I've played Astro's Playroom, and I'm thankful that it paved the way for a game like Astro Bot to exist. I'm extremely optimistic about the new Astro Bot game, the future of the franchise, and the future of PlayStation games in general. Astro's Playroom and the expansion of the franchise with a full-fledged release is a sign that Sony is getting things right. I think they're starting to get the variety that they need. Astro's Playroom was so much fun, and the series has an insane amount of potential, and I cannot wait to see how Sony taps into it.